for joining me today to learn about the online therapy unit, some of the services that we offer, and one of the ways that we can help to improve student mental health within the province. So I know that many of you attended the symposium that was held last year by the Ministry of Advanced Education. So this is when we were still kind of in the planning phases or the planning stage for the UniWellbeing course. So it hadn't been released in Saskatchewan yet. But I'm really excited now to have the opportunity to give you some updates on the course, to provide a bit of an overview on the findings that we have from the students who have taken the course so far. So for those of you who haven't met me before, my name is Vanessa Peinenberg. I'm one of the PhD students in the clinical psychology program at the University of Regina. And my research is supervised by Dr. Heather Hadjistavropoulos. So she's attending the webinar today as well, and she'll be kind of sifting through your questions as they're coming up just to make sure that we're able to address all of them at the end as well. So just to give you guys a bit of an overline or an overview of what I'll be talking about today. So I'll give an overview of the online therapy unit, some of the services that we offer, internet delivered cognitive behavior therapy, and one of the examples that we have of that being the Wellbeing course. I'll talk briefly about post-secondary student mental health and some of the unmet needs that we're finding. And then how we can use the UniWellbeing course as one way to bridge that gap between the needs that students have and the ones that aren't quite being met yet. Then I'll look at some of the client profiles that we have so far. So this is based off of the students who have completed the entire UniWellbeing course to date. Discuss some of the preliminary findings that we have, and then look at what the next steps are in terms of this research study, and then kind of going beyond that too in the more long term. And then, like I said before, we'll have some time for questions once I'm done with my presentation. So if there is anything that comes up during my presentation, you're very welcome to send a message just using the chat at the bottom, or you can save it till the end once I'm done, and then we'll make sure that we're able to address all of those. So the online therapy unit has three primary areas of focus. So one of them being service delivery, where we provide effective online programs to individuals with mental health concerns. So there's a primary focus on anxiety and depression, given that these are highly prevalent and disabling conditions. But if you look at our website, you'll see that there's a lot of different courses that we offer. So I'll go through some of those courses in a bit more detail later too. The second area of focus is on education. So the online therapy unit provides education to graduate students and to therapists in how to deliver ICBT. And then finally, the third area of focus is research. So we conduct multidisciplinary research on the reach, adoption, efficacy, and implementation of ICBT. And we're fortunate enough to have funding and support from a number of different organizations that you'll see listed on this slide here. And so personally, with my dissertation research, I am funded by the Saskatchewan Centre for Patient-Oriented Research, or SCIPR, as part of their trainee program. So again, we know that mental health concerns are very prevalent. However, there's a lot of challenges that individuals face with accessing face-to-face services. So some of those include stigma, direct and indirect costs, mobility challenges, so it might be really hard just for people to physically get to an appointment. Time constraints, so if you're working full-time, it can be hard to fit in those regular appointments with a psychologist or a counselor within working hours. The next point, rural or remote location. So within Saskatchewan especially, we have this very geographically dispersed population. And unless you're living in one of the major cities, it can be really challenging to access mental health services without having to travel a very long distance. For other clients, we see that there's this preference to self-manage. So they want to be able to manage their symptoms on their own and maybe don't want professional help with doing that. And then also when we just look at the nature of these conditions, so with depression and anxiety, some of the symptoms can almost act as barriers that prevent these clients from seeking out help. So with depression, we have low energy, low motivation. With anxiety, there's fear and avoidance. So these might make it more challenging for people to reach out for support in a face-to-face setting. And then also, obviously, given the current kind of environment that we're living in with COVID-19, a lot of the face-to-face services have been put on hold. So I think one of the really great advantages of ICBT over the last couple of months is that we have been able to continue our operations and to continue offering services to clients without any major hurdles or kind of bumps along the way because of the way that we offer services in an online format. It just allows for that continuity throughout everything that's been going on. So just to provide a little bit of an overview of ICBT for those of you who might not be quite so familiar with it, what we have is a combination of structured online materials. So typically it's developed or it's delivered in the format of online modules or lessons that clients work through at their own pace. And this is combined with do-it-yourself guides that go through the different skills that they learn on a weekly basis too. And so with our programs, the do-it-yourself guides can be printed off for clients to work on their own time as well. And then there's case stories for that describe different clients who have gone through the course and how they found the different skills helpful. So with the online content, this is paired up with therapist support in the form of secure messages through the website, as well as occasional phone contact with one of our therapists. So I mentioned that primarily the courses that are offered by the online therapy unit have this focus on depression and anxiety, but you'll see that there's a pretty long list here of some of the different courses that we offer. So for the ongoing ones, there's the Wellbeing Course. This is the kind of the biggest one that the majority of our clients go through. There's also a Chronic Conditions course, so this includes things like chronic pain as well. And then there's the Alcohol Change course, which focuses on reducing alcohol consumption for people who have problematic drinking. And then on top of that, we have the student-led projects. So people who are graduate students like myself or other research associates that are affiliated with the online therapy unit have projects too. So the one that we'll be talking about today obviously is the UniWellbeing course. But there's also ones for spinal cord injury, for mental health at the workplace. With PSP.net, this is focusing on mental health for public safety personnel. And then in the upcoming months too, there'll be courses that focus on people who have concerns with sleep as well as neurological conditions. So just to provide a bit of an overview of what happens when people register for our courses and the number of clients that we've been able to serve over the years. So these numbers are based off of our stats from May 2020, since the online therapy unit started in 2010. So we screened 8,489 clients. Of those, 7,918 completed a telephone screen. So the way that it's set up is people first do this online application, and then they book an appointment on the telephone with one of our clinicians, just to make sure that the course is going to be a good fit for them and to address any concerns that they might have about motivation or any constraints that might limit their ability to take part in the course. So out of those people who complete a telephone screen or interview with our clinicians, close to 3/4 of them end up being accepted to one of the courses, and then the other quarter is referred out. And then from that point, they get matched either with a therapist who's employed by the online therapy unit, so they specialize just in ICBT, or one of the community therapists who is trained in ICBT, but also maintains a caseload of face-to-face clients. So here's a bit of a breakdown of the Wellbeing course. So it's 8 weeks long. There's 5 different lessons or modules that the clients work through. And so for some of the lessons, it's like one lesson per week. For some of them, they have 2 weeks to work on them if there's a bit more content to cover. And then with all of the courses too, we have these additional resources that clients have access to. So there's just various additional concerns that clients often come with. So it might be things like grief or trauma. And so these resources can be really helpful for helping to manage those things on top of their symptoms of anxiety and depression. So I mentioned how with all of the clients who go through the course, they also receive therapist support. So with the therapists, they're trained clinicians, either with a background in psychology or social work. And then there's also some graduate students, and mostly from the clinical psych program, who end up being therapists too under the supervision of one of the psychologists. So the vast majority of the support happens through this secure messaging system that is a part of the online therapy unit's website. There are a few cases where there would be telephone contact between the therapist and the client. So if there's a significant increase in the client's measures for depression and anxiety, so we use the PHQ-9 and the GAD-7. So if there's an increase of 5 or more points in a week, then that would be one of the reasons why a therapist might reach out on the phone. Also, if we notice that there's an increase in suicidal thoughts, that could be another reason for reaching out on the phone. Or if there's just a specific concern that the client has or a question where they maybe need a little bit more support, and it would be easier to manage that with phone contact versus a message, then that would be the other case too. So for the most part, like the standard model of care is to offer contact once a week across the 8-week treatment span. However, there has been some variability in terms of the frequency of the contact just based off of different research trials that have been conducted. So just looking at what the difference is between offering it once a week versus offering contact within one business day of the client reaching out to see if that has any impact on clients' outcomes. So here you'll just see a bit more of an overview of our service outcomes in terms of what results we've had for clients who have taken part in any of the courses. So for about a quarter of people who reach out to the online therapy unit, this is their first form of mental health care in their lifetime. I just want to highlight some of the numbers at the bottom too. So what we find is that about 95% of clients say that it was worth their time and that they would recommend it to a friend. So this shows that clients in general are very satisfied with it. They find it an acceptable form of treatment. And then it's also very effective. So with the bottom right corner, you'll see that on average, we see about a 50% reduction in symptoms of anxiety and depression. So this graph just kind of shows what I just mentioned in terms of that, the really quite large reduction that we see over time. So I'd just like you guys to focus on the blue line, which is for people who are scoring in the above the clinical cutoff. So these are the folks that we're really interested in, where with the first star, that's before they receive treatment. The second star is at the end of treatment. So we see this really nice reduction in symptoms over time throughout the course. And then what you'll see is with the rest of the graph too, these changes are not only maintained at 1-year follow-up, there's also this additional small reduction in symptoms that we see 1 year after they finish the course. So that means that these changes are still remain in the long term too. So that's really promising. And then we see a similar graph that happens with anxiety too, where there's about this 50% reduction. So now I'm going to switch gears a bit and focus on post-secondary student mental health, because I know that that's kind of the reason why we're all here today, is to talk about how we can work on improving that, potentially using the UniWellbeing course. So mental health concerns are highly prevalent in post-secondary populations, and on a global scale, we're starting to acknowledge the need to study the specific concerns of this population. So with the World Mental Health International College Survey, it's one of the largest surveys that's done internationally. So in the most recent one, there were 14,000 students that were surveyed across the world. And what they found was that nearly 1 in 3 students met criteria for a mental health disorder in the previous 12 months. The most common out of those was major depressive disorder, followed by generalized anxiety disorder, and then alcohol abuse and dependence. So despite there being this really high prevalence of these mental health concerns, it seems like only about 25% of students are receiving treatment in the previous 1-year period. So that means that we're missing out on a large proportion of students who potentially need that care. So there is a subgroup of people who will experience remission without receiving formal care. But again, there's this other 75% who would likely benefit from some sort of support. And so really more work needs to be done in order to be reaching out to that population and ensuring that they're getting effective care. So in terms of the treatment barriers, I know that I already discussed this a little bit with the general adult population, some of the barriers that they face. But with students, they've done specific research on them as well. And what they find is that the most common barrier for accessing services is this preference to handle problems on their own, followed by wanting to talk with friends or relatives instead, being too embarrassed to seek help. So again, that kind of goes in line with the stigma that I mentioned. For about a quarter of students, cost is a major concern, and then also time, transportation, or scheduling. So it can be really, really challenging to fit in appointments with a therapist with a student's schedule. So again, ICBT is one of those ways that we can address a lot of these barriers so that post-secondary students can receive access to care. So based off of the findings that I described already for the online therapy unit, in general, with adults, we see these large reductions in symptoms of anxiety and depression. But with students, again, it's a bit of a unique population. So based off of a meta-analysis that was done on students, they reviewed 35 different studies, and they were looking at web-based treatments in general. So this isn't just ICBT, but it's looking at a variety of different treatment modalities, but the commonality between all of them is that they're delivered in an online format. So by looking at all of these different studies combined, they found small effects for improvements in depression, anxiety, and stress. For studies that were focused on using a CBT approach, so something like ICBT, there were larger improvements, but again, it was still, it's smaller than what we would see in the general adult population for people with anxiety and depression. And then some of the studies have also looked at what the effect is on students' social and academic functioning, because obviously for students, this is an important part of their daily lives as well. And so we want to see if things like ICBT can improve those areas of their functioning too. So one example of an ICBT course that has been used in post-secondary populations is the UniWellbeing Course. So this was developed at Macquarie University, and it's quite similar to the Wellbeing course that I described before. However, it's developed in a briefer format. So there's 4 different modules that are delivered over the span of 5 weeks. And each week, there's also these do-it-yourself guides to help with practicing skills, along with the additional resources that were quite similar to the ones that I mentioned. One of the differences is that all of the case stories are based off of student experiences. So they're developed in a way to make it more relatable to student concerns. So things like exam stress, anxiety about moving away from home. So things that are just a bit more relevant to what a student would be going through on a day-to-day basis. And with the research that's been done on the UniWellbeing course, they were also using this brief weekly contact using secure messaging or the telephone. So here's a kind of an overview of the different skills that are learned or that students learn about on a weekly basis. So in week 1, it coincides with lesson 1 of the UniWellbeing course. So there's psychoeducation about anxiety and depression, as well as the cycle of symptoms. So helping students understand what the relationship is between some of their thoughts, their physical symptoms, and then the behaviors that they have as well. Week 2 is where they kind of learn the first practical skill, and that's looking at thought challenging. In week 3, that's lesson 3, it's focusing on the physical symptoms of anxiety and depression, so over-arousal and under-arousal, and then how they can manage those using skills like controlled breathing and activity planning. Lesson 4 is spread out across 2 weeks because it is a heavier lesson in terms of content and just the types of skills that they're learning about, they need a bit more time to be able to really grasp those and be able to apply them to their life. So it's looking at some of the behavioral symptoms, so things like avoidance and safety behaviors, and then using graded exposure, or what we refer to it as the exposure step ladder within the UniWellbeing course. And then finally, relapse prevention. So encouraging students to come up with a relapse prevention plan so that they can understand what some of their warning signs are, what their triggers are, and then how they can be proactive about getting themselves back on track, while at the same time recognizing and normalizing the fact that lapses are common, they occur for most people. But now that they have the skills from the UniWellbeing course, they know how to apply that so that they can kind of keep moving forward with their life. So with the UniWellbeing course, prior to the trial that we're kind of talking about today, there has been previous research on it in Australia. So it's been delivered to thousands of students there. And what they found is large improvements in symptoms of both anxiety and depression. One of the main concerns that has come up is these high attrition rates. So a lot of students are not completing the full UniWellbeing course. So one of the concerns there is that they're not getting like the full dosage of therapy. So if they're only getting to lesson 3, then that means that they're not doing things related to behavioral symptoms, to graded exposure, and they probably haven't put in place a relapse prevention plan. So they would be at higher risk of having that increase in symptoms later on down the road too. So they've made changes to the course over time. At first, there was a 57% dropout rate, so really quite high. They were able to reduce that to 41%, but that still means that a large group of students aren't completing the whole course, and that's what I see as potentially an area where there's room for improvement. And in their studies, they also have not included any kind of measure of academic or social functioning. And like I mentioned before, this is an area that might be important for students, so it should be explored some more. So with the current study, some of the objectives that we had was to, again, reduce attrition rates or dropout rates, like I described from the previous slide, where in Australia, they have found that there are a large number of students who aren't completing it. So that's one of the objectives, is to work on improving that, as well as potentially improving outcomes overall. So with the trial that we're working on now, we're testing out different ways to see if we can reduce those attrition rates and improve outcomes. So one of the things that we're testing out is the inclusion of motivational interviewing exercises at the beginning of the UniWellbeing course, as well as a booster session that follows the course. So 1 month after students finish it, they receive this additional module. For this one, it's self-guided, so they don't have that therapist support, and they just kind of work through it at their own pace. But what we see with face-to-face therapy is that often a booster session can be quite helpful, and it's usually within like 1 to 3 months after they finish treatment that it's the most effective, because that's when people kind of might step back from using their skills a little bit, or they might notice their symptoms sliding. And so the booster session really just helps to boost those skills that they had, to get them back on track and to get them working on that, their relapse prevention. And then another thing that we're doing to try to help with some of these outcomes is taking more of a patient-oriented approach to our research. So I'll go into that in a bit more detail on the next slide too. And then overall, really the bigger objective with all of this is to improve access to evidence-based mental health treatment for post-secondary students in Saskatchewan. So with the patient-oriented approach, we have patient partners who are essentially students within Saskatchewan who have lived experience with anxiety or depression. So they've had the experience of trying to work through their undergraduate degree while also dealing with their own mental health concerns. And so what we're trying to do is essentially partner with them throughout the whole research process. So they've been there through every step of the planning, and then the implementation, and then later on, as we move towards like the dissemination and knowledge translation too, they will be constantly playing this role. So far, we started with weekly meetings with them. Now we're doing once per month. So they have been highly involved and engaged with the project throughout. We also have been trying to be in constant contact with student leaders at the different institutions. So this could be members of the student union or different student groups on campus too, as well as health leaders. So this can be physicians, it could also be mental health professionals. And so that's kind of part of what we're doing today with this webinar, is trying to just raise awareness with other health professionals so that they know that this is a service that's available and that can be utilized by clients that they might be in contact with. And then kind of on a broader scale, just constantly being in contact with the Ministry of Advanced Education. They've been really great with helping us spread the word about the program and kind of marketing and advertising for us on social media too. And with this trial, we're really trying to look at it beyond it just being a trial. So what kind of long-term changes can we make in terms of implementing this service so that students can continue to have access to it in the future and continue to benefit from it? So who's eligible for taking the UniWellbeing course? They have to be registered at a post-secondary institution in Saskatchewan. So one note about that, though, is that they don't have to currently be registered in classes. So we recognize that right now, with it being the spring-summer semester, there are some students who we would still consider to be students, but aren't necessarily taking classes. So maybe they're resuming in the fall semester. These students would still 100% be eligible for it, because we think that now could be a really good time for them to be proactive about their mental health, to learn some of these strategies so that they can be in the best possible situation to feel equipped to take on the fall semester. Students also have to be at least 18 years old. So this is the case for all of the courses that the online therapy unit offers. They have to self-report symptoms of anxiety and depression, have access to a computer and the internet, and also be present in Saskatchewan. So there have been a couple of cases where we've had students who applied for the course and then kind of in between had left the province because with some of the concerns arising with COVID-19, some students have moved back home if they were from out of province. So we are trying to accommodate in special circumstances with this to see if we can still offer them some sort of care. Obviously, with ICBT, and the UniWellbeing course, it's a great program for a lot of students. However, for some students, it might not be the most appropriate level of care. So if somebody has been hospitalized for a mental health concern in the previous year, if they have unmanaged mania, psychosis, or substance use, if they're at really high risk of suicide, then with these kinds of clients, we would recommend that they seek out a higher level of care. So usually it would be some sort of face-to-face services. Obviously right now with the current environment, things are a little bit more limited with that, but we do try to get them in contact with somebody who could have just an increased level of contact with these clients, because it's harder to manage that higher risk using the platform that we currently do. So now I'm going to spend some time giving an overview of the first 70 clients that have completed telephone screens with us for the UniWellbeing course. So just to provide some context, the course was kind of opened up to everybody in March. We took our first cohort of clients the week of March 16th. So this kind of coincided with when everything with post-secondaries started getting shut down and the whole province shut down. So it's really just been over the last 3 months or so that all of this data so far has been collected. So the sample size obviously is going to expand with time, and some of the demographics and stuff might change too, but this is kind of where we're at right now. So looking at where all of the students are coming from, while the course is available to students across the province, what we're finding is that the vast majority of students are from the University of Regina. So that's where we're kind of located as well. About a third of students have been from the University of Saskatchewan, and then the remaining few students have been from Sask Polytech, Northlands College, Briarcrest, and then there's been a couple of students too who were completing online courses through Athabasca University. So one of our hopes is that over time, this distribution will really even out more so that we have representation from the institutions across the province. So again, that's one of the goals of the webinar today, is just making sure that we have as many institutions on board with this as possible, so that the students in some of those smaller colleges as well are still able, are aware of the service and are accessing it. So looking at the demographics of the students who have applied so far, the vast majority have identified as women. 13% have been men. So overall, there hasn't been as much of representation from men and gender minorities. Here we have the breakdown of where the students are in their post-secondary education. So about 50% of people are either in their second year or third year of their undergraduate degree. We did open the course up to graduate students as well, just kind of acknowledging that mental health concerns can be even more prevalent in this population, and they're often more reluctant to reach out to face-to-face services, such as things like counseling services on campus. So this is just another resource that's available for them. So some of the groups, what we're finding that we aren't maybe reaching quite as much as we would like to, men and gender minorities, maybe graduate students a bit more, and then definitely some of the smaller colleges too. We would like to see more representation from them. And the course is open to international students too. So as long as they are like within Saskatchewan when they're taking the course, then they're able to take it. So they don't have to be a Saskatchewan resident. However, what we've found so far is that only 3% of our participants have identified as international students. So now looking at their symptoms when they first come to see us. So for those of you who aren't maybe familiar with the PHQ-9 and the GAD-7, these are the measures that we use for depression and anxiety. So on average, what we're seeing is that the severity of these symptoms might be slightly higher than we've seen with our like kind of general adult group. However, given the fact that this is like a smaller sample size, this might change over time. So this is something that we'll just kind of have to be aware of as we progress. And what we do see is that there is this really wide range in terms of symptoms too. So some people are really scoring in the more minimal range, some are in the very severe range. I think it's kind of interesting to note that with about 50% of people, they're reporting that they've had their symptoms for more than 2 years. So I think in the context of a younger person who's maybe in their first or second year of their undergraduate degree, this is showing that these have been kind of more long-term problems for them. This slide just gives an overview of where the students have been finding out about the online therapy unit and the UniWellbeing course. So in general, with the courses that the online therapy unit offers, the most common referral source is typically from a physician or a doctor, GP, something like that. However, given what's been going on with COVID-19, many people might not be visiting their GPs quite so often, or they're just interacting with them in a different way too. So we thought that there might be a reduction in referrals from this source. Within the student population, we're still seeing that doctors and medical professionals are like the top referral source. However, the online referrals have been a large proportion too. So this is from things like social media, emails that have been sent out, and other websites. About 16% of people reported that they heard about it from a family member or a friend. And then one of the areas that we're seeing is quite low is here with counseling services. Only less than 10% of our clients have reported that they heard about it from either like a student support service or counseling service from their institution. So again, I think this is another area that we can improve on or get that number up as well. and so that might change in the long term too. So I just want to spend some time going over the preliminary findings that we have based off of the students who have completed the UniWellbeing course. So in terms of our data collection plan and analysis, what we do is we have kind of like baseline data before people start the course. We do post-treatment, so immediately after they finish it. And then there's also a follow-up 1 month after finishing and then 3 months. So we're trying to look at what some of the longer term outcomes are for students as well. So the results that I'll be talking about are based off of just a comparison of before they start treatment to right after they finish treatment, because we don't have the follow-up data beyond that at this point. So I mentioned that with the UniWellbeing course, there are 4 different lessons. So we've kind of broken it down in terms of what the furthest lesson is that students have completed. We have here that 61.8% completed all 4 lessons. About a quarter only made it to lesson 2, and then the rest made it to lesson 3. This graph is kind of a simplified version of what you saw earlier with the well-being course, and so it's just looking at before treatment and then right after treatment too. But again, we're seeing this really nice decrease where with depression, it's kind of in the range of 50%, where people are starting in the moderately severe range for depression, and then by the end of treatment, they're into that minimal to mild range. So it is definitely a significant reduction there. And then very similar picture in terms of anxiety, where is that about 52% reduction. So I mentioned how one of the problems that we see with the UniWellbeing course has been the high rates of dropout. So that means essentially people who aren't completing all 4 lessons. With the kind of overall data that they had for Australia over the years, 50.6% completed all 4 lessons. What we're finding based off of the small sample so far is about 62%. So slightly higher for our case. And then also with the reduction in symptoms for depression and anxiety, it does appear to be higher at this point. Again, I just want to note that this is based off of just over the first few months of the trial, and so we'll need to have more numbers to see if this is a consistent finding over time. But I do think that it is really promising to see that the numbers so far have been higher in terms of completion rates, in terms of symptom reduction, and because this could suggest that some of the changes that we have made have been effective in terms of first reducing dropout, and then second increasing how effective the course is for students. Overall, what we're finding is that students are very satisfied, either satisfied or very satisfied with the course. 87% would recommend it to a friend, and 91% said that it was worth their time. And then after completing the course, we ask students about, again, whether or not it was worth their time, and then they have the opportunity to kind of elaborate on that. So why did they think that it was worth their time, or why did they not think it was worth their time? So I've just provided some of the quotes from different students here in terms of what they really liked about the course, what they found helpful. So the first one here, it helped give me more details of techniques, many more than I ever got from other therapy experiences. It provided the time and space to slow down and take the time for self-analysis. It was a great learning tool that has already started helping me in my daily life. So what we're getting here is that people are finding that this has been helpful for them. For some people who have had experience with face-to-face services, they're acknowledging that there are some advantages potentially to using something like ICBT, so they're having more time, more space to do it. With the last comment too, they said with other therapies, I felt like I was forced to do things that didn't work for me, but in this course, I could use material in a way that really worked for me. So they feel like they're able to kind of use the content in a more personalized way, and that was really beneficial. We also wanted to look at changes in perceptions of stigma. So this was based off of some feedback that we had from our patient partners, where they wanted to identify different outcomes that they thought were related to their own experiences, where would taking a course like this have some sort of impact on um, some of the self-stigma and just their perceptions about other people's stigma surrounding mental illness too. So I guess with some of the psychoeducation that happened in the early stages of the course, they realized how, with the second quote, it really showed me how common mental illness is. I didn't know that so many people were struggling. And so they found some comfort in knowing that they weren't just the odd ones out with this, and that there are other students who are struggling, but that this can be a course that's really effective for them and helpful. With that, there's also been some areas for improvement. So one of the more common themes that has come up with some of the areas for improvement is surrounding the case stories. So for some students, they found that the case stories weren't necessarily so relevant to their experience. They found it challenging for them to connect with that. So this was, again, one of those comments that came up for a few different students. Some others found that it was hard to share their full experience with the therapist because it was with that online format, and maybe that wasn't so comfortable for them, so familiar. So one of the things that we've done to try to address some of this feedback is working with our patient partners. We created 2 additional case stories. So the first one is Marissa, who's a 36-year-old single mom of 2 little girls. And this was just to address some of the concerns that mature students were having. So we aren't just getting students who are in their early 20s. We've had students in their 30s and 40s too. And so they felt like they needed some content that was a bit more relevant to them. So this was one of the ways that we did that, was expanding on the case stories, creating one that was more relevant to that experience. And then the second one has been related to just addressing some of the student concerns that have come up as a result of COVID-19. So in my conversations with students, some of the things that have come up is this stress or worry about what it means for their degrees, whether or not they'll be able to get their co-op placements, their internships. They have concerns about their finances and getting summer jobs, all of those kinds of things that weren't the case 6 months ago. So we also created a case story based off of some of those collective experiences that students are having in response to COVID-19. So like I said, obviously this is part of a research trial, but we're trying to look at the more long-term too. So what's going to happen after this research trial is done, and what kind of impact can that continue to have? And how can we integrate it into the mental health services that we have for students? So obviously right now we're in kind of like the recruitment stage for the trial. For my particular dissertation, I need a minimum of 280 students to go through the course. And then with that data, we'll be analyzing it to look at how well it's been implemented, and then disseminating the findings. And then beyond this trial, the plan is to continue offering this to students, but using the findings from the trial to inform how we can better improve service delivery. So we'll be wrapping up pretty quick here and then moving on to questions. But for those of you who are interested in referring students to the course, the best way is to direct them to the website. So www.onlinetherapyuser.ca. We want to make sure that they're applying for the UniWellbeing course and not the Wellbeing course, because this is the one that has been specifically designed for students, and so we want it to be the best fit for them. Some suggestions in terms of how you can kind of indirectly refer students to is including a link for the application on your website. So with the University of Regina Counseling Services, they have included on like their homepage as well, like if you're open to using online resources, then this is one example of it. So they've kind of made that public on there too. And then there's also posters and business cards that I've created for distribution. Obviously, right now it's a little bit more challenging to get those out to people. But if it's something that you're interested in for the future, once we're able to resume face to face contact and services, then you can definitely reach out to me, and I'd be happy to provide those to you. So that is the end of the formal part of this presentation, I guess. And so I just want to thank you guys for taking the time to learn about the online therapy unit, to learn about the UniWellbeing course. And I'm now going to open it up to any questions that you might have.
Hi, Vanessa. Heather. Oh, maybe I can turn my video on there. Thanks for doing that presentation so that everybody could learn about the great work that you're doing. I just wanted to add in an extra comment. So one of the things that you might be wondering about is like, why refer clients to this particular program? You know, there might be other things that you're referring students to. So, you know, just a self-help website that doesn't have therapist assistance. Health Canada right now with COVID-19 has some different resources that are open. And I think you know, it's always kind of a difficult decision about, you know, why this program over some of those other ones. I guess, you know, from my perspective, like why this might be of interest. So one is it is specifically tailored to students. So a lot of other resources that are out there are not necessarily tailored to students. And so they won't have the rich examples. The second thing is that the course, it does have a lot of evidence behind it, like Vanessa shared. So really strong outcomes relative to other outcomes. And then third is the research evidence really shows that the therapist assistance makes quite a bit of difference for clients in terms of the outcomes that clients get. So what we know is self-help, just fully ICBT program without therapist assistance will get some effects, but typically quite small. And we do offer that therapist assistance, which does make a difference. And we know that the higher the symptom severity, the more important that therapist assistance is. And then the other thing is because we are funded uh, by the government of Saskatchewan, the online therapy unit overall, I think there's a good chance that we will continue to offer this long term for students. And on on top of that, we know from counseling services that students are really not interested in long-term programs. So even if you look at sort of a typical length of treatment, a student goes to counseling services, it's quite short. So this program has been designed with that in mind to shorten the length to meet the needs of those students. And I think the other thing I was going to say is that the online therapy unit is very linked in with family physicians and different mental health clinics in the province. So if at the end of this program, you know, it's not a good fit, there's a, you know, potential either to refer back to counseling services if that's the right fit, or maybe onto a mental health clinic or to see a physician about medication. So there's a lot of coordination of our unit with other service providers. So that makes it something that's a little bit different. Um, and I also just wanted to mention, because I know that Vanessa highlights kind of the lower completion rates, but among students, that's actually a pretty, you know, pretty big concern with face-to-face treatment as well, that students early on, or a young adult early on and seeking care tends to come for care and then kind of drop out. So the fact that we're getting right now about 60%, or even if you get 50% completion rate, it's very positive. And I think some of the things that Vanessa's added in are really exciting developments that you don't necessarily see in other services. So it's just my little plug there. And if you could let us know how we're best able to connect with you and get the word out, we'd love that. We'd love that feedback. We do have cards and posters, but you know, we're really trying to figure that out. So if you have any comments or questions about that.
I did notice that there was a question about the cost for students. So I definitely should have highlighted this better, that it is complete, all of the services are free. So there's no cost to enroll, and same with all of the other courses too. So that was just one of the questions that I saw on the side here.
Hmm. There was a question here as well, Vanessa, around whether you're tracking data regarding what major students are in, what they're.
Right. So we don't have necessarily like what their specific degree is, but we do have like whether it's focused on like sciences versus arts and those kinds of things. I didn't break it down that way today in terms of like analyzing where that's at, but that is something that we can potentially look at still.
Hi, Vanessa. I'm Luana. So I have a question for you, if that's okay. So I work with the students that they have several problems with anxiety, and I would like to know more about the topic. Do you think it's okay if I do the program just in terms of knowing more, of learning more about the topic? Do you think is it possible?
Like for you to go through the actual program, or is that what you're
Yeah,
asking?
yeah, to the material. I don't know if I'm a student as well, so I could potentially participate as a student. I'm doing master's degree, but I would like to know more about really the topic, about the strategy that you mentioned today through the program to be able to better advise my students. So I don't know if I could potentially join the program in terms of learning more about it.
Heather, is this something that you could maybe comment on in terms of like what are typical approaches for something like this?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it is possible. Especially if you are a student, the process is basically that there's an online application. There's quite a few questions. Because it is therapist assisted, we want the therapist to have enough information about the clients that they're working with. And so you would do the online application, and then there's a telephone call. And during the telephone call, they would see if you would meet the criteria. We do accept clients who you don't have to have like a full blown depression or anxiety to take the course. I'm not sure, Vanessa, though, if you could speak to your cutoffs. I know that the Wellbeing course, which is the longer course and isn't tailored to students, but has the same types of strategies, has a very low cutoff, so that that people can take it more sort of for educational purposes. So Vanessa, can you speak to your actual cutoff?
Yeah, so I think it's the same as it is for the Wellbeing course. So for the PHQ-9, it's a score of 5, and same with the GAD-7. So like we've only had one person that we've screened out because their symptoms were too low. Like in general, I think, especially with kind of everything that's going on, the majority of people experience some level of anxiety, and that's normal. And it's very easy to kind of be within that range. So.
Yeah, but I would say the one thing about the Wellbeing course is that it's relevant to everybody. Like the strategies that are there, these are strategies that everybody can benefit from. Everybody has bad days. It is the case that the higher the symptoms, we know the more likely people are to complete it, because of course you're more motivated. But in general, the types of strategies are they're just like general well-being skills. Like, so we know that to feel good about ourselves, it's a matter of kind of small habits. It's about how we think about ourselves. It's about how we manage physical symptoms, the behaviors that we display. So there's certainly nothing wrong with taking a course like that. So if you're a student, you could apply to that course, and if you're not a student, you could apply to the other course, which would give you a very good sense of what this would be like for students.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for clarifying. I will definitely take a look on it. Thank you.
Awesome. I saw that there was another question about when is the next course starting? And so with like the UniWellbeing course, it's just ongoing in terms of like you can apply at any time. If somebody wanted to apply at 2 o'clock today, they could. Like there's no, it's not kind of like rolled out in different groups. So I guess in summary, it's ongoing.
Yeah, in part we call it a course because we see it as you're learning kind of skills and uh, the other thing is that there isn't much of a wait. So sometimes if you were to go to another service, you know, it might even be a long wait to get into that service, whereas this is very quick from the time that you complete the online screening to you then book a telephone call. That's quite quick, and we try and get clients in. I'd say it's very unusual that a client would wait more than a week or 2 weeks at the most, and probably with Vanessa's course, it's even faster to intake.
Yeah. Yeah, so we get people like they'll go through the phone screen and then they start the course on the following Monday. So for some clients, they're booking a phone screen with me on Friday and then they're starting on Monday. So it's very quick in terms of that turnaround where we are able to get them into it really fast.
And I saw a question here about, can you post this on your college webpage? Absolutely. You can post this anywhere. So if you contact Vanessa or Vanessa even after this, you could send out an email to the whole group. So anybody who wants to link to our website can do that. We do have posters as well if you prefer to just put like a poster up that sort of describes what this is about, and then they can link to the site. That would be wonderful if you would do that. So, here we have room, we have a resource, and we just want to get the word out as much as we can.
Yeah.
Oh, and this looks like the Psychology Student Association has the link up as well. So that's great. Excellent.
I know there were a couple psych students who signed up today, so it was good to see that representation from students as well. Okay, well, I think we have like if there's any last questions, we could probably go through one quickly. And otherwise, if there aren't questions, like I'm always very open to responding on email. If you'd like to set up a separate phone call or Zoom meeting, I'm open to that too. If there's anything I can do in terms of like sending the posters, or if you need like a little blurb or description to put up on the website, I'd be happy to share that.
Yeah, and the other thing is that Vanessa has like a 2-minute little video of what her program is all about, and it's on our website as well. So that's kind of a helpful way for students to see as well. I'm also going to offer Vanessa out to give any talks if you think that could be helpful. If you have any other suggestions, she's always happy to do that. And maybe I'll send a follow-up email, Vanessa, with the link to this talk and maybe the brochure, and then people can easily email you.
Yeah.
Thanks everybody for coming out. It's so great to see so many people interested in what Vanessa's up to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really
Yeah.
appreciate everybody coming today. And I'll send a follow-up with everybody too, like you were saying, that we'll have just some extra resources that we can continue getting the word out.
Great.
Okay.
Thanks, Vanessa.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.